Okay. So this meeting is being recorded henceforth. I hope all of you have seen the agenda, so I'd like to pull that up and share it with you. This is the draft agenda. So from the first iteration that went around to the members, I did have just herbicide as noted in the agenda, and then I've changed that to pesticide to capture the lampricide and the herbicide together. And so the first agenda item is to approve the meeting minutes. The second is to some administrative tasks. And the third, overview of the aquatic nuisance control in Vermont, discussion of areas of concern, and then discussion topics and assign committee tasks, identify milestones and dates for the committee members, develop agenda items for next meeting, and 10:15 is other. And this can be for when we open the meeting to the public. I just wanted confirmation for that. And then 10:30 is to close the meeting. Do I hear any comments about the agenda? Hearing none, I guess the agenda will hold. Unless I'm not seeing. I don't see any hands up or anything, so. Yes, I believe I let everyone know they're being recorded and transcribed. Okay, so the agenda then will stand as is. And the next item there, therefore, is to approve the meeting minutes from the first meeting.
So I would move approval of the minutes for the meeting of September 27, 2023.
Excellent. Can someone second?
I second.
All those in favor, say aye. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those in
Aye.
favor, say aye. All those in favor, say aye. I guess we need to mute. So maybe a show of hands for anyone that's abstaining. Okay, so the ayes have it. The meeting minutes will move forward. And therefore, the next agenda item is the presentations. So this is the overview of aquatic nuisance control in Vermont, presentations of aquatic nuisance control permits and history of pesticide use in Vermont. And so as I'm providing this presentation, I can't see anyone. So if anyone would like to comment on the committee, please either unmute yourself or Olin, if you can let me know if there's questions. So this is the highlight from the Act 57 again as to what the committee has been charged with and the recommendations that the committee shall include in the report. So I've just highlighted some of those items. And I think we're all pretty well versed on what those items are, so I'm not going to read through this. So the Aquatic Nuisance Control Program is under 10 VSA 1451, and it defines aquatic nuisance control. There's also elements of transport of aquatic nuisances or all aquatic plants. There's also a mention of the Aquatic Nuisance Control Granted and Aid Program. We are also charged with putting up signs throughout the state and also working with our partners. 10 VSA 1455 is the component that lists the permits and what is required of those permits. And this is a summary of those charges under the permits of who and what and how permits are applied to and then provided. There are two types of permits. There's the general permit that's used for non-chemical control using bottom barriers or diver assisted suction harvesting or DASH by an association or an individual that is small scale and does not exceed 15 square feet, or an association using rapid response control. This has only been used once for rapid response control, and this is basically a permit in case a new infestation is found, we can react to it very quickly. And it's also to capture individuals who have private ponds, for example. The individual permit is really what we're going to be kind of looking at throughout the study, and that's for the control using bottom barriers, DASH, mechanical harvesting vessels, pesticides and herbicides, structural and biological control. So who and what gets permitted? Permittees are normally like associations, municipalities, and property owners. They do target dense aquatic nuisance vegetation that impacts the public good, whether that's swimming, navigation, and projects that target an invasive species are more likely to be permitted, although there are some that are for native species. Invasive species are considered a major stressor in the Vermont surface waters management strategy. And projects targeting native species are typically not permitted, but if they are on a larger scale, then they are allowable control practices that can be utilized. But targeting having the non-targets targeted is frowned upon, and we try to control how those permits are utilized. So the most common project types are for controlling Eurasian water milfoil. We have about over 100 lakes in Vermont that have Eurasian water milfoil. They're also for water chestnut, and that's work that's done on Lake Champlain and other water bodies. And then, of course, we have the sea lamprey program that uses chemical and non-chemical control projects. So permits that use a pesticide may be issued up to 5 years, and permits for other practices are up to 10. So the exemptions are for private ponds with a surface area of 1 acre or less that's entirely on a person's property with an outlet flow can be controlled. If they are going to be using any kind of pesticide, then they have to control the outflow. So the types of control practices are listed here. I'm not going to go through and read all of these because I think perhaps many of our members are familiar with these practices. Hand pulling does not need a permit. Bottom barriers are pretty common, and it's a permittable action and practice that's more common. So is diver assisted suction harvesting, or DASH as it's called. Hydro raking is not really utilized in Vermont. Mechanical harvesting is really used for typically mowing invasive species, especially used for the water chestnut operations, and then for Eurasian water milfoil as well. Pesticide treatment is used, is highly targeted, it is expensive, and there are some non-target impacts. Pond dyes are not permitted in Vermont, although there are some small landowners that use them, and we're working on trying to provide education and outreach to those parties. Copper-based algicides are used in small ponds. Again, so that's that general permit. There are some structural controls, and that's mainly used with the lampricide treatments to inhibit movement of treatment of the herbicide, or also it's sometimes can be used for water chestnut where it inhibits the species moving out of an area. Biological controls, we used to use a Eurasian water milfoil weevil around in the 90s, but unfortunately it's very resource intensive, and it's also highly likely to be eaten by bass, so that's not a practical method to use. Here's the pesticide used for aquatic nuisance species in perspective. So how many treatments have been utilized over the years from 2000 to 2023? And you can see there's been 3 herbicides that have been used for aquatic plants, and those are very targeted herbicides. You can see over time it has gone up with the amount of water bodies treated. So the red lines are the amount of water bodies that were treated in those years. And you can see where this yellow line is when Percellacor started to being used. And you can see even though the water bodies were the number of water bodies was quite large, the acres treated was less, and that's also because we limited Percellacor to be used at 40% of the littoral zone only, rather than whole lake treatments. So up to this point, whole lake treatments were used as a mechanism and a control method. Throughout the 23 years, 16 total water bodies have been treated.
Again, we have a question from Senator Bray.
Sure, thank you. Senator?
Senator, you're muted.
Need to unmute. How about now?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. Clicking didn't seem to influence the mic. Thanks. Just a quick question for scale. Do you know total acreage of water bodies in Vermont?
The total of all the water bodies in Vermont, I have a breakdown of the permitted water bodies in the next few slides.
Okay, yeah, I mean, so I think my question was kind of excluding Lake Champlain, how many, even just a rough figure, where you see, for instance, 200 acres, I don't know if I'm guessing that's a very small fraction of total
Yes.
acres, but.
Yes, for the number of acres treated, yes. And I can move forward in the other slides.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. It's not, there you go. Let's see. Yep, so that's in a few slides, and I can get to that question right now. So of the Procellacor projects, this is just Procellacor. We didn't look at all of the projects from 2020 to 2023, but I can certainly do that. So this is just within the past 5 years. Vermont has 438 lakes of ponds greater than 10 acres. So it's hard to get at all of the lakes. We have 800 lakes, so that would be a really immense challenge, but we can certainly do that if you like. So of the 438 lakes that have 10 acres or more, of the 11 permitted Procellacor water bodies, about 2.15% of those are of those total. And the treated amount of those is in 2019, 0.07%, 2020, 0.05%, 2021, 0.1, 22, 0.045, and 2023, 0.042. So very minute acreage has been treated compared to those total acres. Does that get at your question?
Yeah, that's really helpful. And then one other sort of the mechanics of how this works. If you treat just a limited number of acres within a larger body of water, is the notion that you're really only treating for the most part those limited acres, because by the time it diffuses elsewhere, it's at a such a minimal level that it has virtually no impact?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. I'm going to go back to explain some more of those points. Okay. So just looking at those treatments over time, sonar was used in 8 lakes, and those were whole lake treatments. So that's when we allowed whole lake treatments, and that was a practice so that they could basically eliminate all of that Eurasian water milfoil and then utilize the other practices such as dash and bottom barriers and try to get and eradicate those infestations. Same is with Renovate. That was more of a spot treatment kind of application. And you can see some lakes utilize that practice more so on an almost an annual basis, and some were utilized just when needed. And during that time from 2006 to 2019, there were 2 whole lake treatments of Hortonia and Star. And then in 2019 to 2023, so Vermont Fish and Wildlife was concerned that those whole lake treatments were really making an impact on the habitat structure for fisheries. And so we worked together to limit the whole lake treatments and only do spot treatments for utilizing Procellacor because it was a much targeted herbicide. And so moving forward, we've only allowed a 40% treatment on the littoral zone. And yes, targeting those infestation locations that were more dense. Moving forward, there we go. So currently we have 108 active aquatic nuisance control permits, 38 general permits, and 70 of the individual permits, and those are utilizing herbicides and pesticides. 53 of those 70 individual permits are for an aquatic invasive species, such as Eurasian water milfoil, water chestnut, and 1 for Eurasian water milfoil and curly leaf pondweed. 11 of those are for native plants, and 6 are for lamprey control. And then I have a breakdown of what those other permits are for. 63 of those permits are to control Eurasian water milfoil. 11 are for herbicide The first permit for Procelicor was 2019 in Lake Maury. It's generally treated in mid-June, and that's when the plants are the first to come up. So it's very targeted, and that reduces the risk to non-target species. Eurasian water milfoil falls out of the water column within 2 to 4 weeks. And also, as I mentioned before, it's limited to 40% of the littoral zone on an annual basis. So again, there's no biological controls being used at this time. Also, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife uses lampricide for lamprey control in 25 rivers and deltas. And maybe Eric, if you want to speak to this, perhaps.
Yeah, I didn't prepare to talk about lampricide and haven't seen these slides. I'm happy to answer questions on this. I will say that there aren't any deltas treated on the Vermont side. That's only on the New York side of the lake. But there are several rivers on the Vermont side that are treated with TFM and balicide, and then a number of additional rivers that have a structural barrier to prevent adult lampreys from migrating up to spawn.
Thanks, Eric. This is from that fact sheet that you sent me.
Yeah, that's from the Brad Young at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I'm
Oh, yeah,
sure
Brad.
he'd be happy to provide more information.
Thanks. And we had looked at this slide. So we looked at this slide. So right now the active permits for long-term management are listed here. So most of these are infestations that have been around for almost 20 years, some more. But the only lake that really is utilizing Procelicor in a early detection rapid response manner is Salem Lake. And the Eurasian water milfoil hybrid actually was identified in 2018. So they're using this treatment as potential for eradication. The other lakes, it's very difficult to eradicate Eurasian water milfoil once it has been in the lake for a number of years. So now we're going to jump into the application process for getting an aquatic nuisance control permit. So it follows type 3 procedures. The application is on the environmental notice bulletin, which is available for the public to see. There's a minimum 30-day public comment period for the draft decision. And then a public meeting can be held if there's enough consensus for a decision to be reviewed and then notified of for the public, and then have a public meeting. So people and the public can respond to comments and provide those comments at that time. So this is the application process. There is an internal technical review procedure, and that was completed recently, and this is listed on our webpage. So the different commissioners work together to work through what that internal procedure looks like, and there's a way for different partners to provide information, comments, suggestions, edits, and so on and so forth on how these permits are utilized and provided. So the different partners are available to provide input. And some of those statutory criteria for getting a permit are listed here. So there's no reasonable non-chemical alternative. There's an acceptable risk to the non-target environment. There's negligible risk to public health. And a long-range management plan has been developed, which incorporates a schedule of pesticide minimization. So those are those other practices we talked about. And there's a public benefit to be achieved from the application of the pesticide, or in the case of the pond located entirely on the landowner's property, no undue adverse effect upon the public good. So just jumping into some of those specifics, there's no reasonable non-chemical alternative available. This is largely focused on alternatives to really get at that lake-wide population. As we mentioned, Eurasian water milfoil is really the targeted species, and lamprey control is another species that is utilized for large populations. And the project is, dense and considered, a very challenging project to eradicate and or reduce. So it's focused on areas of growth where other non-chemical controls are not reasonable or effective. Looking at the acceptable risk to non-target environments. So what are considered aquatic plants and other animals, wetlands, human use of waters treated with herbicides or pesticides, so farming, nurseries, anything that's irrigated and then utilized on crops. The ecological integrity of the water body. So we look at the biological, chemical, and physical integrity of the water body. And we also look at how that control activity would impact the ecological integrity of the water body and the non-targets. Sometimes non-targets can't be avoided. Procelicor does react to some native species. We try to control the level of the herbicide used, and the same is true for lampricide.
Tim, you have a question?
Yep.
Yeah, is the Department of Agriculture consulted at all about the effects on crops or anything else in their purview?
So that's a really good question.
I can answer that if you want me
Thank
to,
you,
Tim.
Owen.
Yeah. The Department of Agriculture for the use of pesticides, so they've approved Procelicor, so they approve all the pesticides in the state. And so you generally speaking, whenever it comes to these treatments, there's an agency of agriculture inspector present during these treatments. So they're there to make sure that the treatment goes well and nothing's going wrong. They're within the pesticide program. And so that's kind of how the agency of ag interacts with these. They're not included in the internal review procedure for the project itself, but we have a very close working relationship with the manager of the pesticide program for the state, and they generally provide input on these sort of things.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thanks, Owen.
And you have another question?
Yeah, hi, thanks. I'm curious, how are we monitoring for impacts to non-target species? And what are those species that we're monitoring for?
Great question. Let's see if I have that. I do. So these next two slides really talk about that. So the Procelicor is highly selective for Eurasian water milfoil. And again, we use that targeted spot treatment to limit that. Procelicor is practically non-toxic to fish. And so that's within the guidelines of EPA. So other plants and the non-targets, to get back at your question, we do require a pre and post plant survey. And of those plant surveys for the Procellicor treatments, we have done a statistical analysis of those non-targeted species. And we found that Procellicor really does impact milfoil and is statistically significantly lower after treatment. And for all the non-target species, we didn't see any statistically significant decreases for the native species. So while some of those native species are known to be impacted by Procellicor, such as water lily, I'm trying to just use the common names, coontail, Olin, help me on the other two.
Sure. Water shield's
Water shield.
impacted, white water lily and yellow water lily. And then spatterdock or the cow lily, is that the other common
Yes.
name for it?
Yeah.
Coontail, and then it's likely that some of the other native milfoil species, since they're within the same genus, are likely impacted by Procellicor.
Thanks, Olin. I was getting stuck on scientific names. So we looked at those particular species and we did not see a statistically significant decrease. However, the number of sites are small, and we'd like to do a more robust study by asking other states to provide their data. So far we have a potential to receive data from New Hampshire as well. So we also saw some increases in frequency of occurrence from native species. So in the gap of Eurasian water milfoil not taking up that niche, other species just really increased incredibly. So Potamogeton illinoisensis, Pralongus, and then Vallisneria or eelgrass and Zostarella dubia all increased tremendously and took up that space. So moving on to those different projects. So with pesticide and lampricide, so again, those pesticides are highly selective at controlling sea lamprey. There is no non-chemical alternatives that are feasible. They have used some barriers and traps to block and intercept spawning phase sea lamprey. So that's really the only other current feasible method. But truly the non-pesticide control is the best available use. The lampricide permit also requires an endangered and threatened species taking permits. As expected, there are some impacts to rare, endangered, and threatened mussels and amphibian species. The treatment is generally low for those non-target species, and some are sensitive to lampricide, but the Secretary has found that their extensive distribution and ample population densities have ensured the recolonization of those species. And I don't know, again, Eric, if you want to provide any comments about that.
Yeah, I'll just explain that for the non-chemical, the barriers, those are used exclusively on very small streams. For two reasons. One, they function on small streams and tend to get washed out in larger systems. And second, we want to avoid blocking all of the fish that would naturally want to migrate. And so we don't feel that they are a good alternative on larger systems. We don't want to have a negative impact just by blocking natural migrations.
Thank you.
And Kim, you have another question from Senator.
Yep.
Kim, on the prior slide, well, 2 slides back now, the following application, there was the third bullet down there, the increases in the species you went through. And I don't know if any of those are invasives or those are all natives.
Oh, yes, I'm
Okay,
sorry I didn't make
so-
that point clear. Yes, they're all natives.
Okay. And even though they're native, are they problematic? You know, so are we seeing an increase? Or is it a sort of a trade-off in what kind of nuisance we have by selectively, you know, treating milfoil? Do we end up with other ones that, for users of these lakes and ponds, stuff like that, that they say, oh, well, okay, it changed, but there's still a nuisance there. That's what
Yes,
happens
that's
to be a native nuisance.
That's a really good question. Yes, in some cases, that does indeed happen. And we also have to remember the locations where Eurasian water milfoil or any invasive species, plant species, is going to occur is typically a eutrophic system. So there's nutrient-rich waters, and the plants are very happy where they're growing. So if we eliminate the invasive species, then typically, in not all cases, but some cases, the native species therefore fills that gap and also becomes a nuisance. So yes, that does occur.
And I'd like to ask a follow-up because
Mhm.
you're talking about the impacts to other plants. Is there any monitoring for impacts to other aquatic biota like invertebrates?
So that's another great question. So we have not done any studies, but New York has done internal study looking at macroinvertebrates, and they did not find any impacts of macroinvertebrates.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So this looks at the negligible risk to public health. So the Vermont Department of Health has reviewed these, also reviews these activities and looks at the potential concerns for public health and exposure to Procelcor and the lampricide control methods. And generally for Procelcor, they find that there is a negligible risk to public health, both the active and inert compounds. And they also provide the daily exposure, and it's, you know, the amount that is necessary to have an impact on public health would be incredibly much higher than the dosage that is used presently. And the same is true for the lampricides.
Kim,
And
I
so-
might just,
Yes, thank you. I was just going to ask you to comment.
yeah, I would just phrase that a little bit differently. So it's not the amount that would have an impact on public health. The way that the levels are calculated, they're calculated based on the level that will have no effect on public health. So
Thank
it's kind of
you.
the inverse of that.
Yes, thanks for saying that. Did I notice that someone else had a question?
Yes.
Thank
That
you.
was me. Because we've had this same sort of question raised about microcystins in a different arena, has anybody tested whether fish accumulate and could therefore become toxic because they've been exposed to Procelcor and now have it in a potentially toxic dose within their tissues?
I believe there is no toxic buildup, but I'd have to go back and look at the EPA original study. And I can
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you.
I imagine, I mean, in a littoral area, these are highly fished and often consumed fish areas. And if it's concentrated in that area and there's presumably the exposure is too short, but it needs to be considered.
I can look that up, Ellen. That's a great question.
Thanks.
Yeah, I can also add for Procelcor, the active ingredient had absolutely no adverse effect in animals. And so the EPA determined there were no impacts to health whatsoever, which is a pretty rare finding, especially for
Yeah.
a pesticide. The health department took a more protective stance, which I can go into at some point. But yeah, I don't think that's likely. Just a good
Gotcha.
question. Yeah.
Thanks.
So the other component for receiving a permit is a long-range management plan that's been developed. So the general idea is that we're not going to allow, or the state's not going to allow continued applications year after year after year after year. There has to be other control practices that also are utilized, and they have to look at a long-range plan that looks at those pesticide minimization measures. So they have that for Procelicor and also for the Lampricide. And so that long-term program of sea lampy control in Lake Champlain is followed throughout the history of the permit for Lampricide. Finally, there's also a public benefit to be achieved from the application. So looking at the public good, so we look at whether there's public good uses such as boating, fishing, swimming that would outweigh any potential impacts on the water resource, whether there is cumulative impacts from that control activity, whether measures to reduce impacts on the water resource have been taken, and whether the control activity is excessive. So generally, the activities for Procelicor are looking at invasive species, and so there is a public good for treating aquatic invasive species, both in the present and at the place, at the location, so for boating, fishing, and swimming, but also for potentially bringing those invasive species to other lakes and other areas. So there is a temporary decrease in plants of the biomass, but as I've mentioned already, that native plants really take up those locations of Eurasian water milfoil. They have no impacts on the non-target species, and the impacts on the public that may utilize the water resources are temporary and minor as it dissipates rapidly, and there is no buildup, or at least we assume that based on your question, Ellen. I'm going to fine tune that answer. So the benefits to the public good outweigh the potential negative impacts for Procelicor. So again, for Lampricide, there seems to be a public good for using Lampricide to treat the lampreys, and that's for boating and fishing and recreational areas of interest for the public. So they also have been determined to outweigh the potential impacts on the water resource. And Eric, again, I don't know if you want to comment at all about that.
Yeah, I think, in so many ways, the Lampricide is a really different program than the herbicide use, in that the Lampricide can only be applied by state and federal employees and provincial employees in Canada. It's been studied, I think. I provided him with some of the materials, but there's been economic impacts and fisheries assessments. It's also been shown to have a positive benefit for restoring lake sturgeon. Sea lamprey have high sea lamprey wounding is a high mortality rate on young lake sturgeon. So some of the recovery we've seen in small lake sturgeon, we believe, is attributed to sea lamprey control. But I just think it's a really different program. We could spend a few days if we want talking about lampricide and public benefits. I did want to, at some point, I'd like to go back to the statistic that you've used a few times for the 40% annual removal of vegetation agreement with Fish and Wildlife. And it's sort of like what Sarah was saying earlier. It's actually the inverse. But what we've agreed to is retaining 60% of aquatic vegetation. And so it's sometimes communicated as you can remove 40%, but really the agreement was for the percent of littoral zone aquatic vegetation that should be retained after herbicide treatments.
That's right. That was a new understanding between our departments. Thanks, Eric. For some reason, my thing is very slow. Oh, and so thank you all. That was the last slide. So is there, oh, Ellen, do you have a question?
If that was to me, I do not know.
Okay, thank you.
I guess I
was
just
my
had
hand
a
up?
question. I'm wondering about, Sarah offered a little more insight into how the Department of Health has come down on this. I don't know if now's an appropriate time or not, but I would like to hear that.
Sure. Sorry if there's some background noise. Do you mean for a specific product, or do you mean in general how we contribute to the process?
I think you meant in terms of the EPA's findings on Procellacor versus our own Department of Health.
Oh, yeah, sure. So as I said, EPA in their registration eligibility decision, it's the red RED, it's what EPA uses to approve pesticides. They always go through the science, the toxicology, and they pick out the most sensitive species, the most sensitive endpoint. So they describe the toxicity of the pesticide, and then that information is used by, that's what the health department uses, that's used by other states when they're assessing safety of pesticides. So when EPA looked at that, looked at all the studies that had been done on fluoropyroxyfenbenzyl, they determined that there were absolutely no adverse impacts in animals, which is pretty rare. So rather than, and so then what the health department does is we use information to create a drinking water health advisory, so a level not to exceed to protect human health. And if EPA doesn't assign a toxicity, if they don't designate a dose from the studies, then we don't have a quantitative metric to use. And so we took one of the doses from the study. So we basically said we're going to be more protective than EPA. Instead of saying you can have as much as you want in drinking water, we did feel like it was important to look at those studies and provide a drinking water level not to exceed. Was that a helpful explanation?
It was. I guess I'm wondering, we're learning more about what's in pesticides more broadly that we don't hear about because so many of the ingredients are not available to the general public. Is there PFAS in these products that you know of?
Part of our process, and I think this is required in the statute, is that the confidential statement of formulation is provided to the health department. So we do review all of the inert ingredients. PFAS, contamination of pesticides, I don't believe that PFAS would be listed as an inert ingredient because inert ingredients are things that are added, for example, for formulation purposes. It might be an emulsifier or something to keep the active ingredient in solution. I think that the PFAS contamination of adulticides, so these were in mosquito control, I think that PFAS were present from the containers. It would be good if we want to go down that route. I think it would be good to have someone from Agency of Ag come talk to us about what they learned about PFAS and pesticides. So the bottom line is PFAS are not listed in the formulations. It doesn't mean that PFAS aren't present, because as we know, PFAS can be everywhere, especially in some containers.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we've already are over our a lot of times for the agenda items, so I just want to quickly point out the next item on the list, which is the overview of the ANC pre-rulemaking group. So if you click on the link in the agenda, you will be brought up to the pre-rulemaking group. So this was the group that consisted of different stakeholders, and they started diving into some of the topics that may come up in this meeting. So the first meeting was really about the rulemaking process and the background of ANC aquatic nuisance control permitting. And they also looked at some terms in number 2 of trying to define some of these definitions within the statute. And 3 was really looking at how permits are denied and applied for and responded to. So rather than diving into all of that, I thought this study committee and the members might be able to go into those meeting minutes and provide that information. So just pointing those out. And if the committee would like me to, I can also link this information to the study committee webpage if you think that's a good idea. Seeing some nodding heads, so I can do that to make it easier for the public to find those documents as well. And then the other really helpful piece of the aquatic nuisance control permitting is that internal review procedure that was approved by the commissioners this year, how the agency partners are allowed to comment on the permit. So I can also link that into the webpage as well. Okay, seeing some nodding heads, that's great. Thank you, I will do so. So some of those topics that came up in the pre-rulemaking group are in the next topic or agenda item. So looking at clarifying the revision and the statutory terms and definitions, such as acceptable, reasonable, negligible, and what an aquatic nuisance species is. So those are some topics that this group can really look at a little more so. Determining what is public good and identification of stakeholders. I know that there was some comments on how to involve other stakeholders in the permitting process. Right now, as I mentioned earlier, there is a public comment period. We can also hold a public meeting if it is necessary and needed and requested. But then, you know, we also have to struggle with how long these permits are open, and I know there's also been some comments that it takes too long for people and groups to get permits. So, you know, kind of looking at that. And then, so what are those application requirements? And what is the evidence needed for pesticide use? So, you know, right now we do have requirements for people to apply. And so it has to be a well thought out plan, and they have to look at wetlands, they have to look at those non-target impacts. So there's many criteria that are required to provide a permit. So how do we want to make that more complementary and or abundant in the scope of the parameters of the permit? And again, that might lengthen the time period that a permit is allowed to be presented or approved. And then what are some permit exclusions? So there are people who have ponds on their own land and do not have a direct outflow when they're applying a pesticide, so they're excluded. So do we want to, look at private ponds and look at some of those exclusions and really investigate those measures a little more? So those are some areas of concern that I just wanted to bring to the members that have already been identified by the pre-rulemaking group. And some of that can flow into the next agenda item. So now we're back at 9:30. So discussion of some of those topics. So I took the liberty to look through the recommendations that were outlined in Act 57, and I tried to summarize those in topics and tasks and broke them up into these groups. So obviously, to summarize and assess the use of pesticides versus non-pesticide controls. So looking at DASH, benthic barriers, mechanical harvesting. So looking at those alternatives, how can we utilize them more, or should they be utilized more rather than pesticides? So that is a topic and a task that this group can take on. Pesticide effects and precautions on non-target environments and non-target species. So really delving into what are those effects and how can we get some more robust studies and look at those precautions that may take place. Item 3 is to look at the legislation and the standards and application procedures for use in Vermont compared to other states. So I think Vermont is known as being very strict in their permits, applications, and the boundaries that we place on pesticide use in Vermont. I know New Hampshire, they do whole egg treatments. It's actually a pretty common practice to use in New Hampshire. And I think they scratch their head when they look at this very strict guidelines that Vermont has. So we can look at other states and how they utilize pesticides. And then identifying interested parties. So there has been some comments made that the public really needs to have more input into how these procedures are applied for and provided. So who are those people and how would they interact with the permitting procedures? So those are some topics and tasks that I thought this committee could delve into. What do the committee members think about that? Perhaps each of us can take some of those tasks and have work together. My team and I can also look at some of the research and or publications that may be available, and we can provide those materials to the members.
So Kimberly, you're asking, like, are you saying we should sort of divide and conquer on these and pick our areas where we would best fit and take on the tasks in kind of a subgroup kind of way?
Yeah. I think that might be that might be easier.
Yep. Thank you for taking the initiative to organize the topics. And I think that's a good idea. It looks like Bill has his hand up.
Yeah, I remember one major problem with doing permits in the state was putting out the warnings of public meetings and comments and how long that took. And it could take so long that a year would have to go by before the next application can be done. Is there anything that could be done to speed up warning requirements, from 30 days to 14 days? I don't know. It really stalled processing.
Yeah, I think, you know, those are recommendations we can make, and look at what would the impacts be to have a shorter duration of time. I believe it's in statute now, so, you know, we'd have to look at that and how we can make that recommendation to the legislature and then, you know, take it upon ourselves to change that in statute. So yes, so that's something that we can certainly look into. I think in some cases, the public, in my own experience, want more input and more time to look at things. So what is the best time period?
So I can ask a clarifying question. I know you just a number of years ago now, we did look to consolidating the public review process, and someone else in this room that lives this more regularly could speak to that. And so I don't know if you're talking about right now that you're hearing that, Bill, or if in the past and maybe those concerns have been addressed.
Hold on a second. Well, this was far in the past for me. This is like 12 years ago, so I don't know what recently.
We organize permits by type, and then there's more structure and consistency in like a few buckets of how the public review process happens.
I don't know if, let's say, if you're anticipating a permit to be applied, that you can have a draft example of that type of permit saying, one of these might be coming out in the state, maybe in this area. So that would give the public time to look into that. And then when the permit is actually applied for, that the public comments could come a little bit quicker then.
I can answer part of that if you want, Kim.
Sure.
So whenever a permit comes in, the public it's posted on our environmental notice bulletin. So immediately anybody that has that what's the word, subscription, whoever subscribes to our environmental notice bulletin is immediately notified that an application has come in. And then throughout that, I receive comments on a regular basis from members of the public that are commenting on it. And you know, there may be concerns or questions or recommendations from the public, and then that is reviewed by me at will or within the program, and then within the 30-day, once a draft has been created, within that 30-day environmental notice bulletin, you know, public comment period, again the public comments, and that's whenever, you know, if a response is required, then a response summary is created and those comments are officially put on record. So that's kind of how it works. So we do receive, you know, if our timeline is 180 days for a permit, which for pesticides, that's our in-house DEC PEP time is what it's called, and that's like what's required. I have to write and submit a draft permit within 180 days. So there's 180 days for the public to comment, in theory, on a project like that. Most of the time, these projects don't take that long to write these permits, but that's kind of the extent of what they are. And again, the public's notified whenever these are put out on draft, whenever they're put out, whenever they're applied for. But I think one comment that we've received in the past during the study committee was requiring permittees for specific permits to notify the town, notify you know, the select board, the county, something like that, of their intent to apply for a project. And that's something that, you know, obviously the committee can review and take into account.
And, you know, as I said, my experience of this is over 10 years ago. But nowadays, can people send in texts with their comments and get responses a little bit quicker? And if you get a bunch of texts with the same topics, you know, you can lump those together and refer. I just wondered if the process is a lot faster nowadays.
I do get plenty of phone calls. Texts are not as common. I don't know if people realize that I have a cell phone, but I do get plenty of phone calls regarding comments, and those are all taken into account. And people are certainly welcome to text me if they like.
And emails.
Yeah, and emails are, I think, the most common, but you do get the occasional phone call.
Thank you.
Senator Bray, do you have a question? Okay. Great. So the next topic is to identify milestones and dates for committees. Is Ellen still here? Oh, darn. Don't believe. I think Ellen had to leave. So unfortunately, she's not here. So just to look at the dates and milestones for looking at those topics and assigning the committee tasks. So should I ask folks to volunteer to look at a specific topic that they are interested in kind of diving into? Sarah?
Yeah, I can offer to work on part of section B, herbicide and pesticide effects on non-target species. The only species we work on is humans. So I can summarize the work that we've done. For the, it was really helpful for your presentation. It was really helpful to see how you've summarized all the pesticides and herbicides that have been approved under the program since 2020. So using that information, I'll provide the summaries that we've worked on.
Great, thank you. Dr. Bress?
I'd like to look into the definition of negligible risk.
Okay.
That's something that might be helpful.
So that's in the areas of concern. So the topics are below that. So let's see. So is that legislation standards and application procedures?
Well,
That
I think it would be more in the human health review of the pesticides.
Yeah, I know that was heavily discussed in the group meetings that happened before this. I would refer people to Title 18. I think everything is pretty well defined there.
Yeah, so we can upload those resources for those terms. And again, if the committee would like to kind of go back into those stakeholder groups, meeting minutes and presentations, we can look at that and utilize and better recommend how those terms are used. But I think we're really looking at discussion of topics and the summarize and assess the use of pesticides versus non-pesticide controls, pesticide effects and precautions on non-targets, and legislation standards and application procedures for pesticide use comparing to other states, and identifying and defining interested parties and their roles. So those are the kind of, go ahead.
I would say the pesticide effects and precautions on non-targets.
Okay, so you would like to work with Sarah then?
I'd like to work on that. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Yep. Thank you. Eric?
I just feel like we skipped a big step, that the 9:15 part of the agenda was discussing the actual statutory language in areas of concern. And we moved on to this list of topics that doesn't really discuss the statutory language. So when Dr. Bress was talking about negligible risk, that's going back to that statutory language. And I think that's where that earlier rulemaking or pre-rulemaking group was focusing a lot of attention. And I thought that that's what this study committee was really supposed to be addressing, was the language of the statute and potential changes. So I'm just wondering if at some point, maybe for the sake of time, it would be at our next meeting's agenda that we should really at least do a more thorough review of what the language of the statute is, and those different criteria.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at.
Okay, yes, definitely. I was anticipating that people would review those statutes and be more familiar with those, but we can certainly make that an agenda item. Thank you for bringing that out. I realize people are very busy.
Kim?
Yes?
So I'm sorry if I missed a comment on this. My audio cut out for a minute. I had to leave and come back. But once we hear public comments at the end, I mean, I was thinking it would be helpful to hear from some of the stakeholders that haven't yet participated in our meetings to help me become aware of some of these other perspectives of, interested parties. So that it would help me hone my own questions based on the kind of questions or feedback they provide for us. And since we're planning now, but we haven't heard from them yet, I'm feeling like I don't quite know all the things we might want to put on the table.
Mm-hmm. Again, there are some comments in the pre-rulemaking group that available on who some of those interested parties are. And I think it's also the charge of this committee to create a vehicle for how the public is interacting with this member, this committee, I'm sorry. So if we can define that, that would be very helpful as well. So we can get at your question, Senator.
Yep, thank you.
Mhm. So I can take it and assume that you'd like to look at identifying and defining interested parties and their potential roles. Okay, so Eric, would you like to take on the legislation standards and procedures for pesticide use? Being that you would like us to review the 10 VSA statutes more thoroughly as well.
I'm not quite sure what that topic entails, but yeah, I'm happy to review the criteria, the existing criteria in the statute. And, I assume we're queuing these up for a future meeting then, that we would bring back to the group sort of a walkthrough of
Correct.
that topic. So yeah,
Correct.
I'm happy to do a walkthrough of the existing statutory criteria.
And this is also just to perhaps, reach out to colleagues who may also have some information too. So I'm hoping that all of the members here can kind of help fulfill, the research or other direct communication with other states or other colleagues that that I may not be able to connect with or know about or network with. So I'm hoping that the committee members can help build the capacity for this group as well. So there's some homework for you to do. Okay, so pesticides, summarize and assess the use of pesticide versus non-pesticide controls. So far, no one has volunteered for that.
Kim, I think that you described that pretty well in your presentation. I think a lot of those slides and as you're talking about tasks, I'm wondering perhaps in the folder that you created, would it be worth making I guess it would be the draft of our report so that as I prepare summaries, we can, if we feel like we have text that could be included as draft for the report, we can start sticking it in there. And I would say some of your bullet points from those slides could just be copied and put in paragraph form there for that.
Oh, brilliant idea. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I can start that. Does everyone have access to that folder? I think Ellen had some challenges with it and I can work with her to get that. Okay, 9:48. So identify milestones and dates for the committee members. So we've kind of looked at some of these tasks. Some of you have tentatively signed up for delving into those. And I guess though Representative Amy Sheldon, did you want to look at anything specific? I'm calling you out directly, aren't I?
You are. I mean, the topic that I seem most appropriate for was D, and but I also must confess that my resources are limited at this point with lots of other commitments. So I want to be realistic about my time, and I need to circle back and do a little more of my homework in order to understand and make sure we're on task here with meeting the intent of the bill and not repeating things that have already been done.
Correct. Yeah. So it would be helpful to look through that, those other resources that we have, and I can also post them in the folders so you don't have to go and find them too. So you can just go to the one source.
Yeah, I found it a little confusing. I realized in hindsight that you'd set up folders that didn't really have anything in them, but they will. And
Yeah.
this presentation you gave today, will that be somewhere? Because it would be good to have
Yes.
that during the presentation for some of us. When presentations are made, I spent some time looking for it and realized it wasn't really available yet.
Yes, I can make those available, and I will attempt to also provide those presentations earlier so you can review those if that would be helpful. Thanks, Amy.
Since we're talking a little bit about logistical stuff, I'm wondering, in terms of those dates, you had just mentioned dates, and the minutes list a series of dates for future meetings. If we are settled upon those, at least for now, I'm wondering if it would be helpful if you could send out invitations to all those meetings, because then they flow into the legislative calendar, and that will just be helpful. It was great you sent a link, but it's when it comes from you and it goes to my system, it makes it life a lot simpler if I get an invite from you ahead of time. They're all calendared and the live link is in my calendar, so
Yes.
I don't have to search for emails or stuff like that, or ask you to resend the link, all that jazz.
Yes, and thank you for making that point. I would like to send out meeting invites. However, I've also sent a couple of emails saying that Ellen Marsden's schedule does not work for Fridays. So we had confirmed or not to tentatively made Fridays available, but she's not available on Fridays. So I was wondering if Tuesdays may be an available option for people so that Ellen can join the group. She basically has a class on Fridays, and so she would not be able to attend these meetings. So if we want Ellen's participation, we would need to have changed that schedule.
So
Tuesday
the challenge
would be
for me is
available
I'm on
for me
another.
if it's early.
I have a standing meeting, a commitment for another working group on Tuesdays. So that was part of why I asked about the possibility of meeting on Fridays. At this point, I have Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday working group commitments.
And that's all day too.
No, they're not all day. So if we could piggyback, things, a morning and an afternoon, things like that. Afternoons are generally open.
On Tuesdays?
Yes, thank you. Sorry to be.
Okay, that's fine.
All my other commitments are morning meeting commitments.
I see. So does Tuesday afternoon for folks work?
Could it end by 2:45? I have kid obligations some Tuesdays.
Let's just say 2:30 to make it easier. So making these meetings 2 hours, 12:30 to 2:30, might that work for people?
More or less. I might come in when you've already started from the other meeting, but generally it should be okay for me.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I hear
Or 12:45 to 2:45, if that gives people an extra 15 minutes for lunch. Sometimes that's in the lunch hour.
It'd work for me, but there'll probably be 1 week that I won't be able to make it
Okay.
until then.
Yeah, I think as long as we have quorum, that's fine. And I think, again, we're just trying to allow one of our members to participate if she can. Tuesdays, 12:45 to 2:45. Is that what I hear the group saying? Great. Okay, so therefore I will change those dates and then send out the meeting links. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I also will start populating those folders now that I know that everybody can get access to those folders. And start
Kim-
a draft. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just gonna ask, as we think about milestones, can we start at the end? We have a study report due, I think, on December
15th.
15th. So just thinking about what date do we need to have a draft? Do we have an internal review process? Does it have to go up our management chains? So, I think it's helpful
Mhm.
to set those milestones based on how much time we're going to need there. And that might help us realize that we need to have a first draft in, maybe 2 to 4 weeks, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yep, good point. So looking at dates on Tuesdays. The 25th is a Monday, or the 15th, sorry. 15th is a Friday, so on the 12th, then we should have the final. Thanks, Sarah. And then 2 weeks prior to that.
Yeah, I almost question if we would need a meeting on the 12th, because we would hope, we should be done by that point, I think. Maybe.
Yeah, I would feel safer about having a meeting on the 12th,
Okay.
actually. Find, polish or anything that we'd want to look at in the end. So then 2 weeks prior to the 12th is the 28th of November. So having a draft by then, or should it be sooner? Or we should say final draft.
I think I would need to send my comments or my information up. Probably, I would expect at least 2 weeks review time up my management chain.
Okay, so then the 14th.
Yeah.
So that's November 14th. I would have some sort of final draft. Boy, that's coming up close. And so then 2 weeks prior to that is the 31st. Of October. So I think by then, we should have a clearly defined recommendations list. On October 17th. Boy, it's in just a couple of weeks. We should really start fleshing out those tasks. So that really leaves us not a lot of opportunity for presentations and so on. So I think we really have to identify what presentations are required by this committee for me to provide to you or others in this group to provide. That's pretty quickly too. So I think I heard from Eric that the next presentation should be looking really at the statutes and what's in the permit itself. So I can provide a presentation about that.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Would it be helpful for me to provide the committee with all of our active Procelicor permits so you can read through and see how they've changed over the years? Okay,
Absolutely.
I can put that in the folder that you've created, and they'll be listed out with their application, their approved application that has all the updates in it, as well as the permit, and if there have been any complications or comments or anything like that, I'll provide those as well.
We also might want to have examples of permits from the whole lake treatments as well, sonar and renovate too, so we can see how they may have changed over the years too. We don't have to provide all of them because that's a lot of work, but maybe just examples of perhaps the more complicated ones.
Sure, I can do that.
So,
Great.
if this is a quick question, I'm curious why Sonar and Renovate went out of favor, and did they start out highly favorable, just like Procelicor? And I feel like this is a story that we've been reading over and over again, and we keep repeating.
I think Procelicor is a very well-targeted species, herbicide, and the other species, there weren't as targeted. I think, yes, they were effective against the species of concern, but with science, we just become more and more exact upon their effects. So I don't know, Olin, if you want to provide any input about those two.
Yeah, I mean, pre-2000 in the 70s and 80s, we were implementing the use of 2,4-D, which is a broad spectrum herbicide. It's used in terrestrial application and an aquatic application. It's broad spectrum. If you read the product label, it controls something like 200 species, and that's just what's on the label. And that's what we used to use. And so then whenever we switched over to Sonar, it's a little more confined in what it controls, but it's still generally considered a broad spectrum herbicide. And then same thing with Renovate, again, a little more controlled, still a broad spectrum herbicide. But once we've kind of narrowed it down here to Procelicor and the use of Procelicor, if you looked at the product label and what it controls, it's highly targeted. And I can provide the label if you'd like. And you can read through the species that it controls. And there's only a handful of native species that it actively controls. And at the dose in which they're using it, it actually doesn't really control any native species, which is why in our studies we haven't seen any significant impact on frequency of occurrence in any native plants. There are limited impacts on things like we were talking about earlier, like water lilies and coontail and those sort of things. But again, it's narrowing it down as we've kind of evolved in creating these herbicides.
Olin, did you say that 2,4-D was used in this program? Thinking back to the slides that Kim shared, I don't think that I saw 2,4-D listed from 2000. So maybe that was pre-2000.
Way prior to 2000.
Just checking.
I think our last permit for 2,4-D was in like 1988 or something like. I'd have to read. Don't quote me on that number. I'd have to read through all of our past permits. But it's old.
Okay,
and it's not something that's used at all, and it's not something, or well, not legally used at all. We have active court cases out for people that have used it, and that's again not something that we've permitted or allowed, and that's a legal issue that we're working through.
Bill, could you mute yourself? It sounds like you're typing and it's a little distracting.
I think it's a fan. Oops.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think also maybe having the labels of those particular herbicides and what they targeted might be helpful, and what I'm hearing from the group.
And Kim, could we set a goal of having an outline of the report by our next meeting? Just going back to what the statute requires in this report, it seems like the first two items, which we've talked about, the description of summary of pesticides used, assessment of their impact on non-target environment and non-target species, those seem like they're going to be pretty straightforward.
Mhm.
And then that last section, which is the recommended legislative changes, which includes some of the definitions that have been discussed, I think that's where we're going to have more of that, where we're going to need more of this group time to discuss those changes. So I think if we could get an outline, have some draft text in, especially for those first two sections, and then spend, at least maybe focus on what are these legislative changes. That might be a good way to make some progress in the next 2 to 4 weeks.
That's a great idea. Thank you for your suggestion. I can put that outline together if the committee would like me to, and send a draft out. Okay, so we have great some milestones identified. I'm just trying to get the dates to it as we walk through this process here. So our next meeting is scheduled then for the 10th. So I can have a draft of the outline. I can create a presentations on the statutes and the permits as well and provide that to the members. October 17th, we'd have the tasks kind of filled into that outline of looking through all of the different topics that we've been assigned to look into and start filling out the outline. October 31st, we'll have our recommendations list filled out, which will also fill in all the information from that outline. And then the final draft, November 14th, and December 12th with the final will be provided. And I'll write this out so it's a little more clear because I'm not being very clear right now. Eric?
Yeah, I just wanted to check and make sure I've got the right dates. So we're doing every other week, except that we're meeting on the 10th as well. 10th, then 17th, and then every other week.
Yeah, because, the 10th is in 2 weeks, right? So that would be the first week.
Okay, but then we had the 17th.
Oh, I'm sorry.
All of the dates were every other week.
Oh,
except
yes, I'm
the-
sorry. I
the
just
10th.
skipped. So October 10th, 24th, that's what it is.
No, I think we worked backwards and we ended up on the 17th and then you added the 10th. So I just
okay.
wanted to make sure that we're meeting in consecutive weeks on the 10th and the 17th.
Oh, okay, you're right.
Or if we wanted to meet on the 3rd,
Yeah.
which is only a few days away.
Right.
So I just wanted to clarify that I've got the right dates
Yeah.
on my calendar.
Thanks.
We
Yeah, working backwards.
definitely agreed on from the 17th on, it was going to be every other Tuesday.
Probably
Well,
wouldn't hurt to have the extra meeting.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I just want to make sure that we're all going to show up on the same date and time.
on the 10th.
I
Yeah.
actually can't do the 17th, so if there are other members who can't do the 17th as well, we might have to consider, but as long as everyone else is there, my absence shouldn't affect anything.
I do think that we should keep the 10th on, even though it was my mistake to do so, but I think October 3rd is a little bit too quickly for me to get all that information together. The 10th, I would be more prepared. And then having the 17th, I think, would be a great way to kind of dive into the outline and to understand the tasks for the members. So if all of you are okay with that, I will keep that timeline.
I don't think I can do the 17th either. I have a pre-commitment for the whole day.
Okay, so Sarah and Amy, so that would leave Eric, Senator Bray and William and me. So that's only 4. So we wouldn't
And
have
Ellen,
one.
right?
Oh, Ellen,
Potentially.
yeah, Ellen. So that would make 5. As long as Ellen could make that meeting, we could still have it. Okay, so I will check with folks. it would be very helpful for me if you can accept the meeting minute or the meeting invites for the when I send them to you, so I know that we would indeed have quorum. So as soon as I send the links, please accept them so I know. Thank you.
Although isn't a quorum just more than half?
Yeah, so it's 5. We need 5 people.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize we had that many people.
So if it's half, then maybe it's just 3. I'm going by what Pete Laflamme had told me. So
I think there are
Mhm.
7 people.
yeah,
right?
there's
So we need 4
7 members. Yep,
or 3.5.
3.5. We'll go with the 4. Go with 4. Okay. Let's see what else is on our agenda. Items for the next meeting. So I think I have already identified, going through the statutes for the permit and walking through potentially a permit again. But really just diving in the statutes. And then
Kim, this is Hannah. We also, we can work on creating an outline of what the report will look like. I think part of what the outline will do will be to walk through the current statute, like you said, and pinpoint the sections that where we might make recommendations to address specifically what's asked for in this committee's charge.
great, yeah. Hannah, thanks for joining us. We just did speak of that. So I think those are 2 pretty big topics. So we can leave it at those 2 topics. That work for the committee? With approving the meeting minutes. Go ahead, Amy.
It sounds good. It sounds good, but I think I heard walk through the statute and then Hannah say the outline will kind of do that too. So are you looking at doing like a thorough walkthrough of the statute and then I think just discussion walking through the draft of the sections of the report. And that's a place where people could offer, we could figure out the process and figure out how we're going to discuss them. I mean, we need to have time for discussion is, I think, what's kind of missing.
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly I can provide a presentation where a discussion, is part of that rather than just me talking too. Yeah.
And I mean, I thought your presentation was great and we did feel free to ask questions. I wasn't criticizing what we did today, but on the other agenda items, I think having a little more time, I mean, I think there's things we need to delve into, which will come out with, I think, just the word outline of what our deliverable is will help frame our conversations.
Okay, so I will create an outline of the deliverables. All of you can also comment on this prior to me presenting, so I really hope that you do delve into this, into the folders, and we have that working document. So it's not me just presenting in another 2 weeks, but having those comments as well before the presentation. Does that make sense? Eric?
Yeah, I just suggested at some point soon, we should have a more robust discussion of the public comment, public involvement, potential for a separate public meeting as well. We've touched on that, but I don't think we've really figured out how we want to handle that aspect of study committee input from the public.
Yeah, I believe the committee decided to have an open public comment period, so I left that as other, because that wasn't really well defined. So thank you, Eric, for bringing that up. And that people can provide comments to this group during that last 15 minutes, which is now a minute. And then also provide comments to the committee through Lakes and Ponds. So we do have an email that we can use, and we can post that on the web page. Those comments would come to me, and then I can compile those for the committee members in our folders. Those comments can be compiled and put into the report. And I guess also the question is how we may respond to questions.
Yeah, and we did talk that, the legislative process itself is open for, public involvement, but I just feel like we raised a number of topics or issues, but hadn't really made it clear decisions other than the 15-minute public comment period and the email address. So, just a suggestion.
Can we finalize that right now?
I would suggest having it on the agenda for next meeting, because right now we're getting into the public comment period, and it seems counterproductive to use that to discuss how to have public comments.
So I can certainly put it on the agenda item for the next meeting that open up to the public for their comments. So can we decide as a committee how we're going to communicate to the public other than the webpage, the option for emails, and then providing them in the report?
Yeah, I agree with Eric. Let's talk about this next week. I don't know if putting the public comments in our legislative report is the best course, but I do agree if we should have the public comment period now, if that's on our agenda.
Well, again, it's not on our agenda list. We have other, so that's open-ended.
I think given it looks like we have members of the public here, I think talking about maybe a more formal process for public comment next week, we could hash that out and maybe leave the remainder of the time for the public who are here to provide some of their comments.
Okay, great. Thank you. Does the committee accept that? Change in the agenda item?
Yeah, I guess I was looking at an older agenda that actually lists a public comment period starting now. So
Right.
that might have been part of my confusion.
Yeah,
I had the
Same
same
here.
confusion.
yeah,
I think we should just ask if there's members of the public who came to comment.
great. So are there members of the public that would like to comment on the study? Please raise your hand so we can see you. John. And you'll unmute yourself and provide your comments.
Can you, I can't see myself, but I don't really care if you see me, actually. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can see you and hear you.
Right. So my name is John Groveman. I'm the Policy and Water Program Director for the Vermont Natural Resources Council. I am here working with and representing a number of environmental groups, including Lake Champlain Committee, and Jared Carpenter is also here. I can see Jared. He's very large on my screen. I can't see myself, though. But also Conservation Law Foundation and the Connecticut River Conservancy. And I've been in contact with the Lake Bomazene pesticide free committee, and I think there's somebody from that group here as well. And I've reviewed what I wanted to say at this meeting, and they said they were supportive of it. Basically, I want to highlight, first of all, I really think it's important to get public comment. All of the groups that VNRC is working with and the Lake Bomazene group were really instrumental in both the previous group that was run by A&R looking at these issues and in the legislative process. So I really, I'm a little bit taken back by sort of the reticence to hear from the public, and there is just another sort of viewpoint on these issues. And I just really what I wanted to do today is, as you set out, I think Senator Bray said one thing that I think really is kind of our main point here, which is, as you set out to do these studies and look at these issues, there's another point of view. I think the reason the study committee exists is because, there's a concern that the program is set up, I think, looking generally at the right issues when we're going to apply pesticides to our waters, but there's a concern that there's been a sort of presumptions towards the use of pesticides where that should be flipped, that there should really be a last resort of the use of pesticides. And that's our general point of view. And I'm happy at future meetings, either, VNRC or other members of our coalition, to explain why. And I'm really interested to see what the different members of this group, through the research that you do and the information you provide, what you say about the impacts of the use of pesticides. But I think that's our general sort of concern. It's not to scrap the whole program, but it just needs to be adjusted. And what I've heard a lot today is, I'm a little concerned because I've kind of hear, support for the status quo. And I know the people at the agencies work with this program, but there are other members of this committee that there's just another point of view, as there often is. And I think you should hear that from us and other members of the public who have that point of view. Other issues that we've highlighted along the way that I think, especially as Eric Palmer looks at the statute, is there really been issues about who can apply for these permits. I think you went over that really quickly, but there's been confusion about lake associations, municipalities, sometimes industry, the groups that manufacture the chemicals are applicants, and I think we believe there needs to be clarification of those issues. There has been a history of, and I know this, I've worked for the Agency of Natural Resources twice, and I've seen this up close while at the agency, varying degrees of involvement with Fish and Wildlife and the Department of Health in input of these permits. So another suggestion that we've had is that approval of these permits be made in statute by not just DEC, but also Fish and Wildlife and the Department of Health. So that's a statutory issue that we'd like to see discussed by this committee. So I just wanted to give a sense of what some of the issues are. There are others we have written, we have information that we put together that we'd be happy to provide to help you as you embark on this effort. But so that's mainly what I wanted to say today. So I hope you'll continue to take public comment, and certainly someone from our coalition will be at every one of these meetings, and we'll be tracking all the drafts, and we certainly like an opportunity to comment on them along the way. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to comment at this time? Senator?
Yeah, I have a question. I don't know if this it could go to the committee or it could go to Mr. Groveman. His first point about a presumption of use of pesticides rather than a treatment of last resort, I might characterize that as kind of a following a precautionary principle. And I don't know if that's embedded elsewhere in any other ANR statute, or that would actually be sort of a novel framework from which to approach this particular issue. And maybe this is really an Owen's bailiwick.
I can answer that if that's okay. So in general, the way that we approach that is that to approve the use of a pesticide in a public body of water, there has to be a history of non-pesticide management actions not working. So in the case of in the case of Lake Salem, which is our most recent pesticide approved permit, which came out a few months ago, they actually just had their introduction in 2018, I believe. It was a new introduction of Eurasian water milfoil. They immediately started doing dash and bottom barriers, and we have the history of them doing that and a proven track record that that wasn't working to control the population. And so that's how that interacted with the permit process. And so it's not written, I don't know how it's written into statute, but it is a part of the permitting process. And so I do believe in the statute, it talks about non-management method or non-pesticide management methods not working. And so that it's part of it. That's kind of that's how we approach it. And so whenever you look at a lake that may have 40 years of Eurasian water milfoil and they're applying to use something like Procelicor, they would have to prove that whatever method they've been using isn't working in order to be approved. And that's to manage it, not necessarily to eradicate it, because we understand that eradication is highly unlikely in these situations.
Sure. Thanks all.
So it strikes me that Mr. Groveman has provided us with like the three things that I went back. I did do some homework and I went back and looked at the testimony that my committee took this session that led to this study committee, and sort of three tangible topics that he just reiterated quite well. Starting with the presumption of when we use pesticides, and then who can apply, and what the role of Fish and Wildlife and the Department of Health is. And so even though we've just considered a draft agenda for our next meeting, I would suggest that we consider those topics to really flesh out the conversations that then will inform the report and the recommendations that get made.
Yeah, I would second that. I mean, that's part of why I said earlier, I don't know how we build the agenda without hearing from the public, because although I'm on the Senate side, not the House side, and much of this work happened on the House side, I'm just aware that there were questions out there that we would want to consult. Otherwise, we could do a lot of good work, as a group, but not answer the questions that will certainly come back up in the next legislative session. So good to have an expert group digging into them now to prepare for the coming legislative session. Would be my attitude about trying to make any work group's work product on target and facilitative to the work ahead on a legislative session.
Kim, you're muted.
Thanks, sorry about that. So therefore, some of the agenda items will be to retain, looking through the statutes and how the permit is framed. And then how are pesticides used? Are they used as a last resort? We can delve into that a little bit. Who can apply? And again, those were kind of already captured in some of those items that we had outlined today, just calling that out. Who can apply? Who are those stakeholders? And the last item, I'm sorry, I kind of missed.
The role of Fish and Wildlife and the Department
of Health, thank you.
Potentially becoming more formal rather than informal.
Yes, again, and just to that point, that's why the internal procedures was completed and signed by the commissioners. So, we have that as well, and I did review that, but we can review that even more so if the members would like to.
Yeah, I think where you just were starting to go was looking at those those three topics,
Mhm.
the use of precautionary principle, who can apply for the permits, and the role of Fish and Wildlife and Department of Health in the frame of the existing statute.
Mhm.
And then if it makes sense to you all, I mean, helping us understand how the agency perhaps is already doing that, and then having a discussion of whether it's adequate to meet that standard in each of the three cases.
Although it came up today, Agency of Agriculture was mentioned as a pesticide regulator and permitter. And I know in some LCAR, Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules testimony recently related to pesticides, PFAS did come up because of, as Sarah said, it wasn't an ingredient listed by virtue of it's part of the formula, but it was present in the chemicals because of the containers that things were stored in. So, I don't know to what degree an Agency of Agriculture role needs to be contemplated, but I would like to better understand what their role could or should be in this work. A little unclear to me now.
Well, and I mean, I guess what is the DEC's response to understanding that we could be inadvertently getting PFAS contamination from the containers? I mean, I think, or Department of Health's response, I think it doesn't matter to me where it comes from, but if we're using products that are polluting, whether it's by their intention or not, I think that's a concern.
And perhaps, Sarah, you can look into that a little more so and let us know.
That would be a DEC issue.
Okay.
Yeah, so like sites like Waste Management, Matt Chapman's group, maybe you could start there.
Okay. Thanks for that recommendation, suggestion. Okay. Well, I'm tasked with a lot of different things. So I will put together an agenda, send it out to the group. Please do comment on it and send me back any qualifications and suggestions. So, and then I will also talk to Hannah and see how we can kind of bring in the statutes as well, and how that initial outline can be developed, and then I'll include those in the folders as well. So we can all start filling out the various documents.
Thanks so much,
Okay.
Kim.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Thank you, Kim.
All right. Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right. So I will send out meeting invites. I will also put the link out for the public to be more involved and to have that 15-minute comment period at the end.
Great.
All
Great.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Take care.
Bye.
You.
You too.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.